So we have a Q&A session right now on growing community. And I'll be giving you a few of our usual introductory slides, but I just want to thank Suzette Snow-Cobb and Deb Habib for joining us for this session. I know you've both given other workshops in the conference, so thanks for coming back to help us wrap up our final workshop session. Deb is a farmer and food justice worker who, as director of Seeds of Solidarity Education Center, brings to life programs that awaken the power to grow food everywhere, transform hunger to health, and create resilient lives and communities. And Deb will tell you more about her work. I know you've just published a book. I know you have a lot of other things going on, so I'll let you chime in a minute, tell us a little bit more. And Suzette is sourcing coordinator working on food systems and development for the neighboring Food Co-op Association. I went to a great workshop yesterday that was focused on that topic. And then she also asked me to note here that she's a co-founder of the Great Falls Community Garden. And so I'm sure she can tell you more about all of that work in a moment as well. I'm going to screen share for a moment and make our usual announcements, and then I'll turn things over to our guests. So as we always do when we start off a workshop with NOFA Mass, we're just doing a brief land acknowledgement. And we want to encourage everybody within our community to take steps to act as allies to BIPOC communities. And some ways to do that are providing resources to BIPOC organizations that are working to feed their communities, being a partner, standing against white supremacist behavior and actions, working to dismantle racism within the food and agricultural systems. So these are things that NOFA Mass is working toward, and we encourage our members to do that as well. We also acknowledge that we are on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. So if you want to take a minute, you can find your location on this map and honor those whose land you now occupy, and we can drop that into the chat. Those of you who've attended the conference all weekend, you know who our sponsors are here. We really appreciate their support. If you shop at these businesses, please thank them for their support of NOFA Mass.
So let's see. So I live in Turners Falls. I moved here with my family in 95. I think it was 95, something like that. And you know, we were newish to the community. We knew, you know, one person who was a good friend of ours, and we knew some people in the area, but we knew right away, we got the sense that there were people that were interested in doing community things, community-minded things. And with our friend David and a few other people, we had identified a vacant lot downtown that had been vacant for a while, and we proceeded to turn it into a community garden. And then after that, we were able to get another lot and have garden space there. And it's been you know, through the years, we've had various gardeners have come and gone. We're still a sort of loose organization of community garden. We're not you know, officially incorporated at all, but especially in the last 7 years or so, we've put a fair amount of attention on flower borders. Mostly people have their own individual plots and they grow vegetables, but we've put a lot of energy into the flower borders, and it's been noted in the, you know, in the town as one of the things that is beautified and brought people together in downtown Turners. And so it's something that we're quite proud of, but also it's been a great opportunity to, since it is downtown, there's a lot of foot traffic, that people are walking by and ask questions and inquire about how they might get a plot or not, and just general way to connect with people who in an urban setting, when often there's, you know, if you don't have young children and in the park or something, there's not really a lot of ways that people connect outside. So that's been really great. I wanted tell about that. And also my other main work has been with cooperatives, and I currently work for a cooperative organization that is a co-op of food co-ops in the Northeast. And one of the main things that I feel really fortunate to be able to do amongst our food co-ops, but also with co-ops of all different types in our area, is working on those connections and getting to know people who are involved with the co-ops, worker co-ops like Real Pickles or PV Squared, and of course the food co-ops throughout Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Southern Maine, and Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and then being able to connect people who are looking for support or looking for just running ideas, or if they're starting a food co-op in their area or another type of co-op, and so it's been a really I feel very fortunate to be able to be in a role where I get to connect with people who are working in the co-op economy, and a lot of that revolves around food too, which is great. And I guess I'll leave it at that, and then we can come back if there's something else that people have particular questions about, or I'll leave it there.
Good to see everyone. And I'm Deb Habib from Seeds of Solidarity Farm and Education Center. We have both a farm and nonprofit in Orange. And I can definitely attest to Suzette's amazing growing community building skills. You know, she is a force for cooperatives and has been for a long time in many ways. So, you know, it's been a pleasure to interact over the years, and great to be on this panel together. And it's a wealth of information I'm going to add about cooperatives, because that is one of the strongest forms of community I think we can imagine, and need more in these times than ever. So, you know, it's interesting. I hope most of you caught the wonderful keynote with Greg Watson on Friday night, and Greg is a friend of mine and a mentor. And when I was 19, I left college and interned at the New Alchemy Institute, where Greg was my mentor. And that was in 1982. But I'd actually gone to the New Alchemy Institute prior to that. And I mention it because I think it was, you know, one of the first times I just had this, like, a visceral experience of deep community. And I was at a, you know, formative age of 12 or 13, and my parents had seen on the cover of the New York Times Magazine these hippie scientists gathered around a solar algae pond in a dome at the New Alchemy Institute, and they were like, well, we should just like go to this place. So like they often did, they threw us all in our beat up station wagon and went to what was called a farm Saturday. And we got there, and like there were people climbing windmill towers and gardening, and like then the bell rang. You know, we did this tour and the bell rang, and there was this potluck lunch. I'd never experienced a potluck lunch before. You know, all these kinds of things. But I had this very strong sense of, you know, and I get teary thinking about it. Like it was like my spirit and emotions just resonated in a way that I'd not experienced. I was like, this is possible. Like this is possible for people to create, to learn, to share in community. And so that really stayed with me. And it's interesting how something like one day can inform the rest of your life. And I've worked with young people a lot. And so I hold that true. So fast forward quite a few years, and, you know, and I should say before that, I was doing community organizing work in Denver. So, you know, I was doing like community work, but it was this visceral experience of community, of then working at New Alchemy for 5 years after having experienced it as a younger person. That was really powerful. Seeds of Solidarity, my day-to-day work is running the nonprofit organization that my husband Ricky and I founded, called Seeds of Solidarity Education Center, and we're small but mighty. We've been around for 2 decades now, and Jocelyn gave a really beautiful introduction. And so what I'm, very happy to share in this time together is some of the ways that we built community through our education work and our food justice programs. A primary program, a flagship program for about 20 years was working with disenfranchised, wonderful, marginalized, diverse youth from our region. We ran a program called Soul Garden for high school age students, many who'd experienced various forms of trauma, almost all who were from working poor, working class backgrounds in our community. And again, it was a gardening based program, but it was the circle at the beginning and end, where we were growing community as well as growing food. I've also worked for quite a few years in the fields of putting in school gardens and farm to school, and that was a primary thing for me for many years in the state and nationally. So I think also the piece about building, how do we build partnerships in our community? How do we take our time? I've heard it said, this is definitely not my quote, but at the speed of trust. How do we build partnerships at the speed of trust so that we can actually do work that's meaningful and authentic rather than just like fly by night because of a grant? Sometimes we find the strongest partnerships in unexpected places, and we can maybe share more about that in our conversation and other experiences people have had. Another place of community that's really vital to me and to us is our neighborhood. We landed in this neighborhood in Orange where we could begin to think about affording land, and we really didn't know what a strong community it was going to end up being and how we would all kind of share resources and support each other in a variety of ways, be it like, lifting up the wall to a building or comforting each other in difficult times or what have you. And then I think finally, a really huge one, and perhaps some of you has been the creation of the North Quabbin Garlic and Arts Festival, which was one of these no one will ever come to a field in Orange for something called a North Quabbin Garlic and Arts Festival. And, we ran it for 21 years, 2019 would have been the 22nd. And, for obvious reasons, we could not, but the spirit of the group remains really strong. But that also has been an incredibly powerful experience of how a group of people wanting to basically do good by their community, support the artists and the farmers, create things for families, make it financially accessible to all while supporting our local economy can work. It's kind of been this phenomenal thing that works. And if you haven't been, 8,000 to 10,000 people show up on a field in Orange to experience over 100 artists and farmers and 3 stages with beautiful music and poetry. And it's $5 if you can pay. If you can't, no worries, and it's all volunteer, and exhibitors help set the festival up. We incorporated that model because that was the only way we could do it. So I would say the founding and organization and sustaining of the North Quabbin Garlic and Arts Festival with the values of community and growing community at center has been a pretty huge lesson for me in that as well. So I will stop there.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to invite people to, if they want to unmute themselves, if they want to take their, put their video back on, if they want to drop something in the chat, however you want to interact. But I'm going to take a moment and see if there are any questions right off the bat from folks in the audience here. And I have a question actually for the two of you. I'm wondering how you have worked collaboratively over the years. It seems like you're both in sort of the same region.
I've been long admirer of the work that Deb and Ricky have been doing, and have visited their farm and the Garlic and Arts Festival. And also just as part of sharing information, I worked for a number of years for Franklin Community Co-op, Greenfields Market, and McCuskers in Greenfield and Shelburne Falls. And Deb and Rick are co-op members, and for a number of years Deb was doing, we offered yoga classes to our members, and Deb led a yoga class for her member work hours. So, you know, trying to make sure that we connect people with things that are going on in our area. I always love to be able to point out the work that Seeds of Solidarity and the Garlic Arts Festival people are doing with that, as I would encounter people new to the area or people looking for other, you know, just other interests, I guess would be some ways.
Yeah, for me, the Garlic and Arts Festival is a place where I go to run into everybody I haven't run into all year.
Yeah.
Like a one-stop shopping for like all the people I haven't had time to see that I would like to see, but just haven't gotten around to it. So it is that sort of coming together.
It's possible, but that back in the early 80s that we might have met you, Deb, back then, because I went with my grandfather, who was a big follower of, was very interested in New Alchemy, and we went for a trip on one of those Saturdays, and I don't remember exactly the date of it, but it was in the early 80s, and I too was like just blown away by the possibilities of community and growing possibilities there, which also, you know, certainly influenced what I chose to do with my life too.
Oh. I can just briefly respond, and then I know there's a few more questions coming in the chat, but I think this maybe relates to some of them. You know, I also just long admired Suzette's skills and perseverance and dedication to community and to, you know, cooperatives in the community gardens and in her own region. But I think also just the piece about taking the time to kind of like build relationships, if even in passing, because you never know when those relationships are going to kind of really bear fruit, you know? So it's like taking the time, even if it's not immediate, to kind of say, oh, like that person's doing this thing, like have a little conversation, or more importantly, show up for their thing, like show up for to help teach the yoga classes at the co-op they run, or like whatever it is, because then you build relationships, and then like a month, a year, 5 years later, there might be like a project and it's like, oh yeah, I know that person, let me check in with them. So I think that's also a really important piece of growing community. So I know you now have some more questions.
So Jen is wondering, what experience, if any, have you had around community-based farmland preservation, community farms, space for community gardens?
Well,
do you want to start?
Yeah. I'll just say very briefly. Again, I don't know exactly how we made the connection through the years, but well, I probably do know. But anyway, Equity Trust, which is a lens and helps farmers lends to farms. There's probably a particular specific name for a small lending organization. And the then director, we knew and then got to know Equity Trust and their work through helping farmers preserve land and get access to land when they weren't necessarily, they do lending, but when they wouldn't necessarily be bankable, or we're looking for alternative ways to be able to have access to land. And so we, my husband and I, through the years have made loans to Equity Trust and have also benefited from getting loans from them. So that's one way, is to, you know, we have felt really good about being able to support an entity that is working for preserving agricultural land and community farms and things related. They have a number of projects. You can find their website pretty easily too.
I will say you can find it a little easily, but it's the .org one, not the .com one. There are two,
Okay.
if you Google it, which I just did, there are two different sites. So I just put the equitytrust.org. I think that's
Okay.
the one you're referring to.
Yep.
Were you done, Suzette?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So we, my husband and I actually purchased our land from a land conservation organization. And again, I say our land with, great respect to the fact that, land ownership and who really were the original inhabitants, in our case, the Nipmuc people of this land. And we were one of the first farm-based programs for Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. They were doing all forest land conservation. And it was really because Lee Youngblood, who was the director and sole staff at that point, kind of believed in us and also believed that a land conservation organization should be moving more towards agricultural projects. And, the board at that time is like, we don't do that, like food, So again, I really want to thank Lee for that. And I think, so it's not a community farm, but it's a farm that was, what we had to do that was really kind of lay out what we wanted to do. And so we talked a lot about food access and community engagement and being a place for community in designing that conservation restriction, it's called, in Massachusetts, which it protects the land from development, but is also actively used. So that's my experience with that. In terms of community gardens, I've been involved in different ways over the years. I would say for me, my not so much community gardens, but school gardens I've been quite active in for quite a number of years. Not so much right now, but if anyone has more questions about that in our conversation today, I could certainly speak to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say, add to the community garden component for us. One of our plots is on private land, and basically it took approaching the landowner and saying, "Hey, you have this space. Can we make a garden on it?" And then another way, not part of there's another community garden in Turner's Falls, and it's connected to one of the parks. And when the park was slated to have some improvements, basically some of us who had been involved with the community garden really lobbied for being able to have garden space there. So in working with the town, we were able to get space, and it's under the Park and Recreation actually, but it came about because of people asking for it, basically.
Yeah, great. I'm wondering if other folks have questions or comments relating to land, farmland preservation, land for community farms, et cetera, before we jump on to the next question. Alyssa, do you want to jump in and talk about something on this topic?
Loud. First of all, hi Suzette, hi Deb. Nice to see you. So I'm working with some neighbors to start a neighborhood farm here on the Patch. The Patch is a small island in the Connecticut River, just below the Great Falls, just below Route 2. And it's a beautiful area. It's really, the river is so beautiful here, and it's very historic, both for Native people and for the more recent settler people. And it's, I've been in the neighborhood for about 9 years, and for Western Mass, it's pretty diverse. And we have this amazing group of people, and we're like, especially with COVID and the neighborhood's really mixed income, we're like, we really want to start this farm. We've been talking about it. And there's been this 1 acre parcel of land that's been vacant the whole time I've been living here. It's actually been vacant over 30 years. And initially the owners were eager to sell it. And now they're being really resistant, and I'm just wondering, they don't even want to talk. And so I'm wondering, this, in the pursuit of land, in the interest of building a relationship, how much energy to put into trying to build a relationship. And, it's a very specific neighborhood. I could leave, we could go somewhere else, but it's just such a unique neighborhood that we're really I don't know, wondering about, there's a number of there's a lot of acreage that's right of way from the power companies, and we're just wondering where to put our energy, because there is energy right now, but it's kind of unclear which way to go.
Suzette, do you have any feedback there?
Well, I guess, I mean, as far as where to put energy, the power company is probably a really challenging place to put time and energy into. It seems like extremely slow going with making connections there, but I don't know. I guess, you know, unfortunately, I guess as in, you know, as the town has become, and Turner's Falls and the patch area that Alyssa's speaking of has become more known and more, not gentrified, but, you know, certainly desirable. Those landowners that landowner might be thinking, oh, you know, maybe I can, you know, get a better price for it, or whatever, holding on to it. I'm not sure. So I guess, you know, just finding out if it's at all possible, somebody else who might know them, that some other way of finding out what the blocks are. That seems like, as individuals, it might be worth pursuing.
Oh,
That's all
may I add? This morning, in our presentation called Farming Without Farmland, which of course was recorded so you can watch it, one of the things, and some of you were there, but one of the things that we spoke of was, you know, the concept of thinking about like land and using land for growing on, not as like, here's like one acre, 2 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre, whatever piece that we can use as farmers, but in your case, Alyssa, as this awesome group of community members, but thinking about like, if this would work for your model, you know, and it might, because sometimes it could be more helpful for transportation and people being able to get to land. Are there kind of smaller spots around that may be, you know, somebody's 8th acre backyard and some other piece of municipal land, and kind of thinking about the land that you grow on being a collection of kind of really, you know, small but abundant spaces with clear but interesting arrangements with whoever does have power essentially over that land, be they a homeowner or the municipality. So I think that's like a model just more and more, because land is hard to come by, you know? And so rather than maybe thinking one plot, even though that can be really bountiful and beneficial in some ways, so can smaller plots scattered throughout a community that collectively hold these common threads of the tapestry of your farm.
Yeah, it's just hard, you know, as someone who's been, you know, has done that in the past and then lost access to land. It's hard to want to do that again. And I'm, you know, I'm not as young as I used to be. So.
Looks like Fred wanted to chime in here.
Yeah, it really depends on the time scale that you want to invest in. And as Deb said earlier, part of the time scale is developing relationships, and you don't know what the fruits of the relationship will be. It may bear fruit much later. If you have the ability to have to be patient, and there may be a point where you may have you may find similar interests in other areas, and then you can come back to the land.
I hear you though, Alyssa, on when we've had a painful experience in the past or a painful relationship, and we feel like, you know, and we have been burned and put a lot of energy in, you know, and loved a place and tended it well. You know, Ricky had to walk away from a 90-acre farm because a business partner became, very unhealthy in the relationship. So, yeah, so I hear you. And I'd say that, how do we move forward from those experiences, of course, that are really hard, and just take those to kind of do it a little, get clearer in the next one. But I'm sorry that happened. I appreciate what you just said also, Fred, about that.
Yeah, I think, what Fred said made me also think of, we had the experience where the lot next to our building where we live opened up, and we weren't ready to be able, and we weren't organized, and we weren't ready to be able to obtain it. And so now it's a parking lot, which is kind of a drag, but it's better than a building. But so the other thing I was just thinking of is of being ready to be able to, whether it's financially or connections or whatever, people-wise energy, when something does become available, to be able to purchase or build relationship with the owner with. So getting to that space of while you don't have anything yet, to be prepared for something.
Yeah.
Which might seem obvious, but in hindsight, if we had, sort of gotten our stuff together earlier, we would have had a really nice lot right next to us that wouldn't be a parking lot now.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess that is what we're doing. Like we're learning more about farm accounting. We're in the co-op training with Wellspring Collective coming up. And we are building relationships. There's a lot of really long-term residents. There's new residents in the patch. There's a lot of really long-term residents, and they love the idea. So that is where we're putting a lot of energy now. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Looks
looks like Robert. Yeah.
Oh, Robert, I'll go.
Deb and then Robert. Okay.
Go ahead, Robert. I'll go after you.
I just wanted to jump in. Obviously, I don't know the specific details to your situation, but one thing I wanted to add was maybe it would be helpful to think more laterally and to continue building those relationships with other community members that also feel as if this idea of acquiring this space would be really helpful and useful for them and for other members of your community, and whether or not collectivizing that would be able to send a more powerful message to whoever is the owner of the lot right now, who seems like at one point was negotiating giving it up or selling it.
I think, and this is just sort of a response that's more general, maybe addresses a little bit your specific situation, Alyssa, but I think more generally, there's a lot of, for example, there's a lot of very large nonprofit organizations out there, let's just say hospitals or health and human service agencies, and it's there's a particularly vicious attack of white supremacy or racism. And then all of a sudden there's this slew of emails, let us tell you all the things that we're doing in our organization. And then you don't hear from them until there's the next, particularly atrocious thing. So I think that also it's some of these organizations that are often white led that are saying, this is the direction we want to go. It's all right, well, put your money on the table, baby, let's holding some of these larger organizations with more capacity, especially accountable for some of those, and saying, great, well, we've got this project, can you help us advocate? Can you help us with resources, etc. There's danger in that because you don't want them to then take it over and say, look at all this great stuff we did, when it was actually the people on the ground doing all the work, right? That happens too often. But I think also if we can, moving into in challenging places like land trusts and some of these organizations that do have a fair amount of capacity and power, and saying, now's the time. Now's the time to create more space for BIPOC, non-binary young people to be having access to land, right? That's part of reparations. So, but again, those relationships, because it can happen where you're doing the work and then they're like, look what we did, So But I think it's also time. Also, I'm trying to get better in my own work and life and letting legislators know like what I'm doing, you know, and I don't know if you've done that or not, but we have so many great legislators right now, and letting them know, because you never know who they're going to be talking to and if they're interested in the cause and so forth, to help.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just want to jump back into facilitator mode here. I saw Noah come on the screen. I think John has something to say. And also, Rose, I saw your comment earlier. I am going to come back to it. I haven't forgotten about it. I'm just letting people kind of follow this thread for a little bit. So thank you for your chat message, Rose. We'll get back to that. Noah, was there something in particular you wanted to say in this conversation?
No, just listening, wanting to show my face.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. John, did you want to chime in?
Real quick, because I think we've talked about this quite a bit, but I see that challenge, if you've got a private landowner and it's a small holding, personally, I think I would attack that as like, we've got to, yeah, it's probably not gonna be a conservation trust. It's probably not gonna be an APR, because they all want, larger holdings of land. But somehow you need to reframe that conversation with that landowner as far as how can we as a community increase the value of that land by, doing a community garden within this space. And at the end of the day, that landowner, if it's framed properly, will see the value in that. And it's the paradigm shift that has to happen, and it can happen. I mean, you'll probably have a pretty good feeling as to whether or not this person can actually accomplish that paradigm shift. But these are the things that are happening right now today. People are starting to value land in very different ways, especially if food is the intention, and those are the seeds that you have to plant.
Yeah, thanks. Alyssa, before we move on, do you want to respond to any of what we've just heard?
Just thank you for the advice. And yeah, light a candle for us.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, so the question from Rose was, so this is going back to a question for Deb and Suzette. What are some of the most important partnerships you have created/nurtured to support your impact on food systems work, and why?
You want to start, Suzette, or should I? Okay. When we first moved to the region, and I was like, sort of starting to ask how we could do the work we wanted to do and be of service. There was an elementary school. My son was in preschool at the time, and there was an elementary school where I saw there was a small garden, and realized it was the food service director who had started that. And so I asked if she wanted to talk about how we might support her. And she was an incredible person. She is unfortunately no longer with us, Sherry Fisk, but she was an early farm to school advocate who didn't even use the phrase, she just did it. Like, she just went around to farmers markets and froze berries and had all of her food service staff cooking from scratch, and really amazing. So, and she was a really long time, very well respected community member. So I think kind of working with Sherry to help serve what she needed to grow her garden program throughout the schools was a really important relationship, because I learned a lot from her, but also, she was a key person, a very, very humble, but very key person in the community in a lot of ways. So that was one really important partnership. And another one more currently is, and Suzette and her work with co-ops has been helpful in this too, is Quabbin Harvest is a food cooperative in the center of Orange. And again, the center of Orange is an old mill town. We're in one of the lowest wealth communities in the state. And so we've been sort of active from the start, which is 10 years ago now, and now there's a storefront in an old bank. There has been for a few years, but that's been a super important partnership. And one example is this year where, you know, there are co-ops. So a co-op is not a nonprofit. Seeds of Solidarity is a nonprofit. And we've been able to partner so that we can kind of conjure some programs, some food justice programs together to get farm fresh food out to folks. We were able to kind of raise some funds, write some grants. And then Quab and Harvest, though, has like the capacity to put together the farm shares, the space where we and other volunteers pack them all together. It's centrally located. So we've been like putting out through a number of programs, including the SNAP Healthy Incentives Program, including a Seeds of Solidarity funded program called Recipes for Wellness, including a couple of programs for senior farm shares, getting out like every week, you know, sometimes 100 beautiful bags of produce. And farmers really needed it this year when their markets collapsed. So we were also able to like buy that food from local farmers. So again, we had that kind of partnership established, but because when COVID hit, we were able to just like snap into action and really, you know, make sure we could buy food from local farmers and get it out to our community. So that's been that co-op, nonprofit, and farm partnerships have been really valuable in terms of food access in the North Quabbin region.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I want to give Rose a chance. Rose, if you have any follow-up questions, and then I want to let Suzette respond to that same question.
No questions, but I'm enjoying the conversation.
Great question, Rose.
Yeah, thanks. Suzette, do you want to comment on any important partnerships in your world?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Rose. That's a great question. Got me thinking back a ways too. And I think a couple of the most important that has perhaps had longer term impact is in my work for individual co-op, for Franklin Community Co-op, probably about 12, 13 years ago, we started, I had connections with other food co-op leaders from, you know, Brattleboro, Putney, the Leverett Co-op at the time too, and we got together and had a commitment with some of the other co-ops in Vermont that we didn't want to work in isolation with our individual co-ops, that if we were going to have a larger impact on our food system and on our own resilience of our food co-ops, that we needed to work together. And we established the Neighboring Food Co-op Association. And we also, in that process, you know, supported the formation of the River Valley Market, the River Valley Co-op, and a number of our food co-ops were lenders to River Valley when they were starting, and also the Monadnock Food Co-op in Keene were lenders to the establishment of that food co-op. And so those relationships that we fostered and built between our co-ops were really, I think, important in connecting people to resources and just general support. And sort of within that too, the relationships that we've been able to build with people in their different roles that we've built, that down the line potentially are potential board members for our co-ops. And that's, you know, as in any organization, you know, having the board members and that being able to work together in that leadership is sometimes it's a really important aspect, but it takes some fostering through the years, because you never, you know, people don't necessarily know that that's what they are called to do until that relationship is fostered. And so that's I think been a really important aspect that I've seen too through the years is the collaboration and then fostering of people to to be able to supporting people and recognizing some of the work that they are doing, so that then they might they would be able to see where they can serve in the in my experience of food co-ops.
Great, thank you. We do have another question coming from Noah. Do you want to just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask?
Sure. Yeah, so I farm in Waltham, Massachusetts, on an old soccer field behind a private high school, and it's been interesting to me because the high school is a private Jewish high school that draws from an hour radius, really all around it, and very few people actually live in the community where the school is. And there's been very little relationship with the surrounding community in the 20 years that the school's been there. And here I am now doing more place-based work. And I think for me, it's kicking up all kinds of stuff like who's here and what's here, rather than just drive to the parking lot and leave. And the school is really behind the farm's outreach mission in general, and as it is reaching out to the Jewish community of Greater Boston and kind of to the constituency of the institution. But there's also a lot of institutions are right next to Bentley University, and Waltham Fields Community Farm is down the way, and there's a Girl Scout camp, 70-acre Girl Scout camp next to us. There's a lot. There's also like a municipal parkland that a lot of people come walking and playing soccer and baseball. And so there's a lot of people, and there's a whole neighborhood next to us. And so I think I've sort of struggled trying to be place-based of sort of how do I interface with the community that is around me that actually my community has shown pretty much no interest in interfacing with. And I know there's lots of systemic things there about many isms that keep us apart and lots to unpack there. But I guess just curious around if y'all have worked with sort of communities that have a very specific focus and are insular and are among other communities, and how to kind of bridge that and bridge those priorities of kind of appealing to a specific group that might not necessarily be living only in the place where you are. Yeah.
May I ask a clarifying question about that, Noah? So are you looking to interface and to bridge for the purpose of, your market as a farmer, and or more like kind of education solidarity stuff?
I think all of the above. I think it feels just weird to me that we don't have a relationship. And if I'm going to be here and farming, like people come around and be like, oh, what are you doing? Like, do you have a farm? So I'm like, yeah, we have it like at dismissal for school, you can come by. So I don't know. I mean, one example that I'm modeling off is like Abundance Farm in Northampton. And what's amazing there is they have multiple institutions that all, when they started the farm, decided to really go in together. And I think, we don't have that. There wasn't that from the beginning. So, yeah.
I have some thoughts, but maybe others on the call do before I speak.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like something that any number of people might have a response to. Does anybody want to chime in before Deb does? Alyssa.
I can say something. Well, so some of the people that are involved in the farm here on the patch are Jewish people. And like, from what I understand, I mean, I'm imagining you might be Jewish, so you probably can speak more to this than I can. But what I understand in the Jewish community here in Massachusetts, that there's like a huge movement for both environmental and social justice. So, drawing into that community of like self-identified Jewish people who also share this passion, and just normalizing it, that it's like a Jewish thing, would be one strategy. And I guess on like a more radical strategy, I'm curious if you're considering like reparations, like sharing any of the space that you have for community gardens or for the local community. That's like a really big-hearted and generous way to build relationship. And I don't know if it's even possible. I don't know what your business or land, is like.
Shall I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that was a great comment and suggestion, Alyssa. And I think also, you, first of all, you knowing what your, capacity actually is as well, because you can start to get things going and then it's like, then it becomes almost too big, right? So you are actually trying to farm. So, it's like, I think having to think about if this one thing could happen, this would be great, whatever that one thing is. But in terms of the school itself, so if I'm understanding, you're trying to figure out how to have some more meaningful relationship with the school. Is that accurate, Noah?
I'm an employee of the school and I have been for 5 years and kind of started this as kind of an entrepreneur. I was a farmer, or I'm growing into my farming from being also like kind of a teacher and experiential educator at the school.
Okay.
So I'm coming at, and yeah, so I'm kind of starting this as a program of the school with a broader outreach mission also. And outreach in this way hasn't been a part of the mission of the school thus far.
I see.
And I think people really care about environmentalism and social justice, but it hasn't quite been in this way yet. And I've kickstarted some relationships with, like I gave 10% of my revenue this year to 2 different organizations locally, which was to Urban Farming Institute, which I had a connection with in Dorchester, and to the Native Land Conservancy, kind of as a thoughts of sort of beginnings of reparations or land tax type situation.
Cool.
So.
Well, the time-honored way to bring people in is through like a feast and free food. So, or pay what you can, so just what you said in terms of your giving and your donations as part of your values and mission. I mean, one just thought that comes to my mind and is to plan maybe like even for the fall or whatever, or late summer, some sort of harvest feast event, for surrounding community members, where there'd be maybe a sliding scale ticket and people would know that, X amount is going to go to support these causes as well. But, and then, maybe there's a local restaurant, whatever you could, or kids in the school could help prepare kind of that feast. Of course, given, that we have to wait until the time is right for all of things, of course, post-COVID, but something like that could, definitely pull people in. And even if you did that annually, that would be a really lovely thing, in my opinion. Just one idea.
Thanks, Deb. Noah, do you want to follow up on any of that before we move on?
No, I appreciate all that. I think the question that I think is hard for anyone else to answer, but is Deb, I really appreciated like the question you turned back to me about like, what am I actually going for and what's actually possible, and what's that one thing that if it could happen. So yeah, that was really helpful, and thank you.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes that's a really key question. You can't do it all. So what's the priority? What's the focus? What's the one thing?
What am I doing? That's a good question.
What am I doing? Why? Yeah. I have a question that's sort of related to this issue of sort of non-locally based, bringing together, when you think of community, sometimes you think of neighborhoods and you're thinking of like, people who all live in the same town or people who all live on the same block. And I think, sometimes to accomplish what we want to accomplish, it makes sense to network beyond there. And so working more collaboratively in, groups across the state. And Suzette, I know this is something that you do, reaching across New England with your network. And I guess that counts as community too. It's not like the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of community, but it sort of broadens that idea. And sometimes I just can't get my mind around that. It's easier for me to think on a local level. And I mentioned in your workshop yesterday that I've been working with this local interpreter and translator co-op here in the Valley. And one of the things that we were told in the process of incorporating was, there's so many interpreter co-ops, you should just sort of merge with another one. And I couldn't get my mind around it. There are a couple in the eastern part of the state. And it was hard to get my mind around that because it's like, we have our little community here. We know our people, we know our community, we know the people around us. we have our network, and the Quabbin Reservoir is almost just like a divider in the state. You know, we just kind of, we don't do gigs in that part of the state. We don't know people in that part of the state. Is that really part of our community? And like thinking in a bigger way, that is part of our community, and we probably should be networking with those folks. But I'm wondering if you can speak to this sort of local versus larger regional community, because I do think it's more effective to, in some cases, to reach beyond that small town view.
Go ahead, Suzette, I'll go.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's like you need both. And I'd say, you know, if the other, you know, co-op or organization is really very much in line with what you're doing, then maybe it makes sense to connect with them. You know, but then weighing your own autonomy, and can you, if you were your own organization or cooperative yourself, is there another way? Is there another tier of that you could connect with? You know, so that would make sense. Also, you know, that there's as a worker co-op, which I think you would be incorporated as, and there's certainly a couple different levels of worker co-op connections, you know, nationally and regionally, that might serve the purpose for connecting to the other entities rather, and maintain your own autonomy too. You know, I see it as a, you know, mixed bag. There's definitely opportunities to connect with other worker co-ops without, you know, merging with one. I guess would one answer be, and you know, it's been really valuable. I think on a regional level and on a national level to have have built relationships with other co-op people. You know, when the National Cooperative Business Association works on a legislative level, and so becoming for us as a co-op, becoming members of that entity, and then getting to know what they're working on, and then feeding them information about what's important to us, a co-op, has been really valuable. And that doesn't meet the needs that we have right here in our region. That's on the national level. So that's like, you need both of those. And you can't do it all. So it's been really important to have that connection with the national organization too, because they can work on those issues that we can give input on, and have some influence and connection with, but not, and they affect us too. But they're not, we don't have to be a part of it, you know, all completely, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Deb.
I was just going to say, I think, yeah, part of our kind of philosophy as a small, you know, regionally based nonprofit organization, and also just a personal philosophy professionally, has been to like kind of work deeply close to home, but then share, you know, what I've learned, practices and resources that we develop as widely as possible. So, you know, for example, we ran a youth program that I mentioned briefly called Soul Garden for 20 years. And then at one point with an intern, we kind of wrote up the 60-page kind of curricula and put it on our website, let people know about it. It's still there. It'll always be there, freely available, with 12 kind of food system, food justice activities for high school age youth, you know, and people all over the country have used it and enjoyed it and adapted it, you know. And I think the same with like my work with school gardens. After actually practicing it for a long time, you know, I made myself available to do professional development work for teachers on, you know, curriculum development in their own communities and so forth. So that's kind of been our philosophy. The other thing that comes to mind is I worked on co-developing really a tool that I think it's really a great tool, especially for planning. It's called Whole Measures for Community Food Systems. And the non-food systems version came out of the Center for Whole Communities. I don't know if Rose, you ever did a retreat there, or anybody else, but it's called Whole Measures for Community Food Systems. And so I worked when the Community Food Security Coalition was in existence on developing this. And again, that's freely available. So I think, yeah, this whole idea of what can we, and I know it's different than what you were saying, Jocelyn, but you know, I think we can share with generosity some of the things we're learning. Sometimes it's appropriate to formally kind of partner or merge or whatever. And sometimes it's more about that, like putting that exchange of experiences and materials into the greater whole.
Yeah, thank you. And actually that has happened a little bit spontaneously because of COVID. Everybody's been doing all of their meetings on Zoom. And so it's become, you know, as an interpreter, I could be working for somebody in California. And so we've actually started this network of interpreter co-ops all over the country. So that's been kind of cool to start making those connections out of necessity. All right, there are some folks we haven't heard from at all. I'm wondering if any of you came with questions or have sort of been mulling over any questions while we're sitting here. Oh, Robert has a question. Would you mind sharing where we can find those resources? Are they all on the Seeds of Solidarity website? So Robert, I assume you mean the resources for teachers and school gardening?
Yeah, I just did reply with our website, and I also put the name of the document I mentioned that you can Google called Whole Measures for Community Food System. There's also, you know, there's a lot of good, other people might know more, but I get in digest form because they're pretty active, the Calm Food, which comes out of Tufts, right? And also Growing Food and Justice is another like listserv. You can get those both in digest forms, and those are great places to just put out, you know, looking for curricula for 7th graders on blah, 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 or whatever. So.
Can you repeat the first website or the first group that you said?
It's called Calm Food, C-O-M.
Like C-O-M.
Yeah, and I think it's still administered out of Tufts. And people will share opinions, articles, resources. I definitely recommend digest form because it's pretty easy. You get it once a day rather than tons of messages. And the other is also a similar listserv, but it's more focused on food justice. It's called Growing Food and Justice. And there's a lot more out there, right? Sometimes there's way too much information. So if others have,
yep.
You know.
Yeah, okay, I put the Calm Food link in the chat. Thank you. All right, any follow-up on any of the things we've talked about so far? Any new questions, topics we haven't touched on yet?
I'd like to ask a question. With you know, COVID came the food insecurity grant that I, you know, was part of the review team of those 1,300 applications. And a common theme from those applications across the board was, whether you're a very small micro farm or a large farm, is that everybody was just swamped. You know, their foot traffic, whether it was online or in person, increased, you know, by, you know, 200-300% or more, and they were just overwhelmed. So you know, that was just a common theme of farms. All of a sudden, their community was discovering them. And I wonder how you both or any other growers that might be on this in this conversation, like, how have you or are you looking at how you can capitalize on the your new foot traffic. I look at consumers as advocates, because once you have those consumers, those are natural born advocates for you and your community. And I'm always wondering, how are producers, growers, looking at this as a way to leverage that support, as a partnership in what you do. So that's just something I always think about. Well, I have been thinking about since March.
Yeah, great question. Does anyone else on the call want to add to that before we do? We're expanding our farm stand. And in doing so, I have to say, when I saw this opportunity for the food security infrastructure grant, Rose, I was like, oh, it's just for stuff. I don't really need any stuff. And then it was like, and so we applied and received an award within our capacity, to fund in advance of reimbursement. But we're creating a more educational space outside of our expanded farm stand, where we can, be both selling produce, but also it creates more space with accessible tables and an awning and hand washing station and things like that, to be able to now hold a few more educational workshops. We're starting a program called Women Healing Earth, and I'm going to run a series specifically for women, especially those impacted by trauma or race or class discrimination. And, and then just some public programs, and combine, art with our teaching about how to start seeds or do no-till farming or whatever. So and definitely as farmers, part of our goal is to attract more people in. So I think it was a busy year this year. We're among the farmers that we're no longer relying on restaurant accounts. We had more farm stand sales and sales to cooperatives and small markets. So for us, our markets remained fairly intact and busier. But yeah, so if this answers your question, so we're trying to think about how to not only bring more customers in, but also do more education. And in terms of, so I don't know if I'm getting at the part you were asking about what, if we foresee that other kind of potential partnerships might come from that. Is that kind of what you're?
I think more along those lines, but also just, the maintaining of those relationships, those customers that might come once a week, maybe a few times a month. Yeah. But they're in your sort of catchment. And if there is an opportunity or a need for community support, for legislation, for, you know what I mean? Any kind of work that would need grassroots support. I mean, to me, that's just a natural go-to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, one of the biggest, one of the most challenging things, especially running a nonprofit, is that, and we've worked really hard, this piece about relationships is really important. And I know in a successful business, it's really important. You have to put energy into taking care of your relationships, right? Right? Is that a co-op is a business, a farm, a nonprofit, all of those things. And so running a nonprofit, I make sure I send those thank you notes. I stay in touch. That takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of time, but it's really important. But I think one of the things that just we need to shift from, and this is thinking, I think maybe more for the nonprofit sector, is a lot of grants, a lot of funding is like a year, right? Or a foundation's flavor of the month or whatever. And it makes it really hard to sustain programs and sustain relationships and go deeper into programs. So I think there needs to be, like the word's been brought up before, John and others, like some sort of paradigm shift where we don't just keep hopping around and more and more and more and different, but to go, to figure out, support is needed, I would say, both for farms and nonprofits and co-ops and community-based work. Support is needed to sustain and go deeper rather than like more and more, bigger. because I think that's where real change happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely second that, Deb. And I think one of the things that our co-ops are looking at or are dealing with the pandemic, slightly, more people coming in or shifting shopping patterns, or is the recognition that our food co-ops are not just combined with other issues in this last year in particular too, is they're not just for natural foods wealthier people, that our co-ops are, that the cooperative model is for, and the availability is for anybody, and that our co-ops are intentionally responding to their community's needs in a variety of ways, whether it be translating materials into different languages, or adjusting their what they're offering product line wise, or getting better at letting people know where their what farms and producers they are supporting, and or organizations that they're supporting, because our co-ops are generate our economic engines. They're not just a they're not an extractive business either. They're keeping money and jobs in the communities. And so I guess our task is also, and continues to be, as those newer people in the community are coming in, how do we make sure that we're letting them know that this this entity is community owned and has an interest in the health and livelihood and welfare of everyone in our communities, not in a different way than a business that is for profit for a few, or somebody outside of your community. And I think that on the state, on the Commonwealth level, the being better at making sure we tell people what are happening, in the interest, what our co-ops are working towards, whether it be food access or how much they do in supporting farmers, is an important part that we haven't been that great at, and we've gotten better at it. But the more that decision makers on the state level know, the better off that we are too, and as recognize that we're a part of the food system in a way that's important. So and that's without some co-ops have been able to access various grants things, but for the most part they're functioning without state or national monies too.
I'm glad Suzette said the word jobs. I'm sorry. I'm glad Suzette said the word jobs, because growing community means growing good, meaningful jobs, and for everyone, and jobs that have healthcare associated with them, and that are in workplaces that are supportive and collaborative and positive, and you feel good about being there. And I think one of the things that I've always thought, just for example, and this ties right into the growing community, is that and this is something that the state could certainly launch, and maybe it's connected to the new Healthy Soils food bill, but small scale composting operations in every community to transform the waste within a community to fertile soil. You're creating green jobs, transforming waste, making much needed soil available in every community. So that's just like, I think one of many, examples of something that I think could happen to grow community while creating work. Very simplified version, of course, of that idea, but I think jobs, and a lot of people turn to like we have all these incredible entrepreneurial people, but there's only so many like value added, like beautiful jars of jelly or barbecue sauce like you can have. So how do we create work or support work that is really creating adding to a much stronger food system while creating healthier communities and good work.
The gist of what I wanted to say was that it seems to me that there's some room for some local community organizing resources for folks who want to do. There's some room for providing resources who wants to folks who want to organize on the local community level. And I think thinking, for example, Alyssa brought up a good point. It's like she was looking for some ways to help create a partnership with a landowner to grow food, for example. Community farms are oftentimes looking for, or folks who want to have a community farm are looking for resources or funding to buy land. That seems to be a big barrier for them. But young farmers who are trying to start farms in communities and so on. So I don't see a lot of resources for folks to pull things together and get things to happen at a community level. And it's a lot of work for them to do that. And there are a lot of people I think who want to do it. So two things. I was listening to someone a couple of years ago who was a commissioner. She was a member of the Agricultural Commission of a town. And she was trying to figure out how to get a farming operation to get started on a piece of agricultural land that the city had purchased. And she knew that finding a farming operation would help save the land from the city, which was looking for a place to build a new school. So this struggle to have a farm and preserve land was a part of her concern, and she wasn't sure where to go to for resources to make that happen. There was one other example. I don't know if I can remember it. But the gist of what I was thinking was that there are people who are looking for ways to grow food in their communities, and they're struggling to figure out how to do it. Oh, so one other thing is that Vermont has a community garden network, I think is what it's called. And I don't remember the exact name of it, but they have networked all the community gardens in Vermont. And it's a terrific website. They have a lot of resources, events, and so on that help connect community garden folks. So that's something to think about in terms of organizing folks on the community level, perhaps. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say. So for the past 10 years or so, I have organized a Sustainable Communities and Campuses conference. And I've noticed over the past 10 years how many community farms have come online in Massachusetts. I think about 10 years ago, there might have been a half a dozen community farms. The past 10 years, I think we've probably brought online at least about 15 community farms. So the increase in community farms in Massachusetts has, I think, been extraordinary. It speaks to the people in communities who want to save farmlands. It speaks to people in communities who want to grow food for folks in the community. It speaks to the interest in community engagement, the interest in educating one another about growing food. So there's I think room for finding resources for folks who want to grow food at the community level. Because I know these community farms and community gardens have worked very, very hard, you know, to pull together resources to make them happen. They've had to work too hard, quite frankly. And it would be nice to have resources available so that they could pull things together more easily. So I hope that Jocelyn, I didn't, you know, run away with this opening that you gave me, but there you have what was on my mind.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, I appreciate that, Jen. I want to give John a minute to chime in if he wants to, and then I'll turn things back over to Suzette and Deb for any final reflections before we wrap up.
I'll try to make this quick, and mostly just because we've got an MDAR representative here. I think that the state, on following up with what Jen was talking about, a lot of it, you know, the infrastructure that I think, you know, that's where any state agency has a big role, because so much of the infrastructure is either prohibitive or not here for a farmer, even on any scale, to some degree be, because this is anyway, you know, we need to get the value back into growing. Right now, there's a lot of people that are trying to make a living farming, and it's very difficult. And part of it is because our society doesn't necessarily value that job anymore. And then the layer that I started talking about, the infrastructure. If you're a you know, a protein producer right now, you can't even get your animals to a market. You know, the processing of meat is very restrictive, maybe too much so. And I understand that there's health issues there, but you know, in some levels, the infrastructure that is there is prohibitive or non-existent. If you wanted to be a hemp grower and you were growing hemp for fiber, there's no place to process that. And those are the things that the state could be involved in to bring the value, to bring the ability for farmers to be valued in their communities, in which case creates more jobs, creates more health, and sort of lays the infrastructure so that when you do have a COVID, you know, situation, you've got a healthy community, you've got employment, you've got people doing these jobs that are critically valuable. I think that anyway, I don't think I articulated that very well at all, but you know, at the end of the day, we need to bring real value back to this, because still people think food should be free or cheap. And somehow, you know, we need to change that mindset. And then the people that are in these communities growing food are valued, and you know, they can actually pay somebody, they can hire people to do more of it and build the community. Mm-hmm. And the state's role in all of that is making sure that the infrastructure actually works.
Great, thank you. We have a couple minutes left. Suzette and Deb, any closing reflections or comments?
Yeah,
I feel like, go ahead.
Oh, I'd just say I'm really I'm thankful for being asked to be a part of this conversation. It's really great to have some space to even just think about how are we building community, what are the important aspects, and sharing that with you. And so I'm thankful for NOFA for, you know, thinking to have that on the agenda. So and it's been great. Good questions to prompt some further thinking.
Yeah, no, I would just ditto that. I feel like I've spoken plenty, and again, thanks to NOFA for this model and this inclusion. I think, yeah, just sometimes, you know, having the space for people to just talk and share is just so important. And may we do it in person again soon.
Yes. Fingers crossed for the summer conference. Well, thank you both, and thank you for everybody who has participated.